Oh my god, it's a double rainbow. All the way. Whoa.
Well, hello everyone. It's that time again. It's time for this show. And it's also time for questions and answers because you've submitted some questions. So let's get on to answering them. Okay, rightio. Melissa Howard asks, has our DNA been messed with so we have 5 senses instead of 7? Is this something to do with the pineal gland? If yes, why? And also, what's your take on the Bosnian Pyramid? Do you think it's a hoax? Well, physicists actually mention 9 dimensions that we can't access. So what if we are accessing the hidden dimensions, say with our intuition, and different parts of our body can tap into these dimensions? Because we're always getting feelings from anywhere, so who knows? And also she mentions 7, so I'm assuming she's talking about the 7 chakras. And I think we actually have hundreds of senses, we're just ignoring them, especially in the West. Westerners tend to ignore all of this stuff and put it down to coincidence or just feelings or whatever. And the Bosnian Pyramid, what about the Bosnian Pyramid? The Bosnian Pyramid is a relic of a flood. Almost everyone investigating it, especially the skeptics, have dismissed the whole point of it. For example, they say, well, it isn't archaeology because there's all this pudding stone everywhere, which is kind of like crushed mud mixed with river stones and other debris from a kind of landslide. And they're missing the point that this would have been created in a catastrophe. And when we combine this with the ideas of the pyramid, which are very different, we see an immediate disconnect. You don't get something shaped like a pyramid which is composed of pudding stone. How would that work? So it shows the whole thing could actually be an underlying pyramid or something which was converted into a pyramid later, but it's something which indelibly has been swamped by some flood. Further evidence for this idea is that you see a lot of straight pathways like just coated with a kind of mud crystal which has cracked at regular intervals. So if you lay a footpath, everyone knows that it also cracks at regular intervals, like every metre or so. So I think that's what's happened here. What Semir Osmanangic and others might take as paving stones, I think are just the cracked layer of mud which has swamped the structure. In addition, Osmanangic has been digging out tunnels which he says have been filled with this kind of debris. I think again possible from some kind of flood, some kind of catastrophe which has overtaken the structure. And then no one's talking about this, no one's got it. In addition, if you look at it from above, it actually only really looks like a pyramid from the town side. And that's another clue, because it implies it's been shaped deliberately into a pyramid, but only on the side that actually mattered, the side that people could view it from. So it was designed to look imposing and artificial. And that's a clue that everyone's ignoring as well. I'm not sure if Osmanangic has talked about that. So it doesn't even have to be an Egyptian-style pyramid to be the pyramid religion. It is the pyramid religion, but in Europe. I mean, you look at the stupas in Asia. Borobudur is a huge round pyramid with walls facing the cardinal points like Giza. Just another branch of that old religion venerating the Babel Tower. So it is a pyramid for sure. It's 100% a pyramid, but it's round. So if you can turn a mountain into a pyramid, it's a lot easier than actually building one. So these guys who say it's not a pyramid, they don't even know what a pyramid is. They don't know where the word comes from. And I've discovered that they actually seem to think, and everyone seems to think, that a pyramid refers to a kind of particular shape like a platonic solid, even though it isn't one. I mean, look up the platonic solids and see for yourself. And the word in Greek doesn't even refer to any particular shape, and it never ever has. So it's just a modern myth superimposed on ancient peoples that a pyramid has to look like something from ancient Egypt. I mean, it's ridiculous. I've spent years researching pyramid and you actually find them in almost every country, but why should they look the same everywhere? If you can make a mountain look like a pyramid, then why not? Because they are all supposed to look like a huge sort of mountain sort of object anyway. Thanks for your question. Moving on. Jimmy Hardy says, "Hey Charles, what's your background? Your history knowledge is impressive. And what about those nubs? A megalithic structure is a combination of softened and poured stone formations." Okay, I'm a historian. I did a PhD in medieval history and it took 7 years to finish. So it was ridiculous. And some professors didn't like it, so I did have to redo that. And that was a pain. Oh my goodness, that was a pain. Now, as for the nubs, I think the nubs are for joining to other walls which are not necessarily there anymore because they've been quarried away. They might have just been taken away. Alternately, the nubs could have been for hanging with ropes sheet metal. Because the Atlantic legend, which comes from the Atlantis legend, which comes from the Atlantic, which is where Atlantis was, talks about Atlantis as a city coated in different types of sheet metal. So that they had to be held up with something. So why not the nubs? And there's American legends talking about the mysterious cities of gold. So there would have been sheet metal on those as well. But no one ever found the cities of gold. There must have been brass hanging off of them. Hanging off of those Inca cities. They are the cities of gold. I mean, where else are the cities? It must be those. Anyway. Now, Jimmy, you've also asked about are megalithic structures a combination of softened and poured stone formations? I think it's both. It's both, and that's why everyone's confused. So people find one stone that's obviously been cut, and they say, oh, well, they've all been cut. But they can't explain how they've been cut. And they say, oh, it must have been a very high advanced technology. But I don't think it was. It could have just been poured. Because if you were working with very high advanced technology, why would you be working with stone anyway? I mean, but I think if they had the technology to pour it, they could have cut it as well. So I think it's both. And if you're going to pour it into cracks like that, and they're both exactly the same contour, then obviously that's been poured. There's no way you can cut it two contours complementary and then fit them together perfectly. Builders will tell you, you can't do it. So that's why it's a mystery. Anyway, moving on, that's what I think. Hey, you might think something different, that's okay. Now, Audrey Cakes says, hello Charles. What do you think about alternate realities that are created on choices? A coin toss maybe. Alternate realities where maybe I wasn't born or living in a different city because I took a different job offer or married someone else. Where does all that energy go? If more than 7 billion people have infinite choices and timelines, personally for many reasons, I don't think anything about how my other selves are behaving. Lol. I'm skeptical of the Mandela effect, but in traditional sense with the alternate reality theory, it might be possible to have slight changes based on billions of individual choices and circumstances. What do you think of infinite alternate realities and where does all that energy go? Massive amounts of energy. Thank you for all your hard work. Congratulations on 20k subs. Thank you, Audrey. Well, here's what I think. Since you put it like that, it would seem that the universe is composed of infinite energy, wouldn't it? On the other hand, what happens if those layers, what if those alternate realities are just layers of this reality and they haven't yet unfolded? They haven't yet unfolded and branched into their own realities. They're just information, just keys which can unfold in a certain way. Just bits of code which are telling us where we could go but where we not necessarily are. What if it's a simulation just running in our brain and those aren't really alternate realities at all? But I think in some ways they are. Intuition can only be an event that has happened to us already in an alternate reality. And our future self is sending a signal back in time to our past self to let us know. I think that's what it is. And then we have a free will, whether we go into that alternate reality or not, by the signal, the nagging feeling in our stomach or whatever the feeling is that we have. So I think maybe intuition just hacks this code so we don't need all this energy, all these alternate realities. Anyway, moving on. What if, that's their name, asks Charles Cos, please give your opinion on whether artificial intelligence will take us to heaven or to hell. Will it be heaven for the few and hell for the many? I think it's a bit of both. And I don't think it will necessarily save us any time to switch to the artificial intelligence world. And the reason is we can't perfect it. For example, let me tell you what happened yesterday. I've got the GPS going. I'm driving. I go 5 kilometers up the freeway to the city. And then it tells me to do a U-turn in heavy traffic, which I do. And then it puts me back onto the freeway, so I go 5 kilometers back into the countryside. And by that stage, I want to throw the phone out the window. But that's artificial intelligence, and it's calmly giving me these commands. So the only way to break out of that loop was to actually take another route so it could reroute. So, are they ever going to get it right? The roads in Melbourne are too complicated for even the most sophisticated GPS software. So I don't know if it'll take us to heaven or hell, but I think we're already living in a cross between heaven and hell, so it'll accentuate what we already have and accelerate it and make it more intense. Anyway, moving on. Kevin Harkins asks, Q&A, is the Sphinx Giza head hollow? And the answer is, yes, it is very hollow, and yeah, there is something behind its ear, a doorway. And what happened in ancient times was there was a priest king, and he went up that little staircase next to the Sphinx. He went inside that Sphinx, and he was preaching to the people below. He was answering prophecies. He was basically the real-life version of the Wizard of Oz, and he was shouting out of that with a booming voice as if he was the Sphinx. And who knows if the people believed him or not. Maybe that's something for a future video. Kevin Harkins asks, Andrew Fink asks, hey Charles, I hope I'm not too late to ask a question. What are your thoughts on the trial passages near the Great Pyramid? What if they leave a layout of the internal structure of the pyramid right next to it? If it were a tomb, then that's like leaving a treasure map next to the treasure. Thanks. Now, what I think Andrew is talking about is he's talking about there's a quarry next to the pyramids, and there's actually what looks like a shaft, and it's all exposed to the air. It's all open to the air. So what's going on with that? So it looks like what's happening is they've done a trial to practice. But that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. I think they might have destroyed a pyramid next to the Great Pyramid with this shaft, and the shaft has been left exposed. They might have even quarried that away to build the Great Pyramid, or to build the Menkaure Pyramid, or to build anything in Egypt. That's what I think. I think it's actually from a structure, because it seems a lot of energy to put into just practice. And if they were, I don't think they were just practicing, to be honest. Maybe they did. Maybe they did. Kostas Kalimaftis says, don't you think that introducing unsubstantiated ideas like G. Hancock's higher spirituality and telekinesis, or Brian Forster's light stones, undermines the goal of forcing mainstream scientists to accept the stone-hard archaeological facts and restudy the megalithic sites without the fear of sounding lunatic and unscientific or undermining their careers? Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Now, I have a book here. Look at this. It's a Graham Hancock novel. This came into my possession. I haven't read it yet. It's long. It seems to be about people 10,000 years ago eating magic mushrooms and accessing alternate worlds. I'm going to read that one eventually, but not yet. But the thing is, scientists are too busy with their own tangents anyway, and anyone who's looking for funding in that academic world is never going to look at the alternate theories anyway. So that they kind of don't like us anyway. So why do we have to pander to anything they say? And look at Ancient Aliens. Why do so many people watch that? It's because we know that our hidden history has not been addressed. And so just enthusiastic amateurs are trying to address it. So obviously there's more. Now, Jonathan Riles says, am I too late for questions? No, you're not. Is the Kin straight road of similar origin to the straight roads across Great Britain? And what are the last 5 books you have read? And who are your favourite lecturers? And how about the extremely ancient artefacts found in coal deposits? And when will you do an ancient mystery tour near me? Let me just answer maybe 1 or 2 of those. The ancient Chinese actually did write books on ley lines. Paul Devereux talks about this in his books. And they laid out their cities according to ley lines, according to energy lines across the landscape. So ancient China, which is a modern survival of an ancient civilization, is actually preserved, I think, the wisdom of ancient Egypt, of ancient Britain, of ancient Europe. And that wisdom was common across Eurasia, it was from the pyramid days. And it was sort of a Stone Age sophisticated cultural technology and awareness. The academics were aware of ley lines, and a lot of this has survived in China as the yin-yang, as the tehre. It survived into the modern versions of ancient philosophies which have picked up old ideas. Okay, what's next? Oh, the last 5 books I've read. I've got some here because I did want to answer this question. Are you aware of an author called Matthew Riley? It's kind of Michael Crichton-ish. Yeah, John Grisham. This one's actually pretty good. So that got me to borrow more. Temple. So that got me to borrow this one, which is a clone of Jurassic Park, or similar to Jurassic Park, inspired by Jurassic Park, but it just doesn't have the Michael Crichton feel to it. So, nah. I don't know. Have you heard of Robert Charroux, who inspired Eric von Däniken? He died in the 70s. This one's pretty old, but pretty good. It's okay. Well, it's okay. This one was very big in the 90s, the Orion Mystery. It's okay. And Andrew Collins is always good. He's more than okay, he's good. He's a great author. So the new circle makers about crop circles, because they're amazing. And the crop circle mystery, whatever is driving it, even if it's just humans doing it, why are humans spontaneously making them now in this age, or in the 90s, or in the early 2000s? And that's a huge mystery. That's unbelievable. Okay, let's move on. Mr. Bricks says, Charles, my question to you. Do you think that ancient builders built in an almost earthquake-proof way because there were more earthquakes then? If there was no moon in orbit, that would explain why they needed to build in such a way, and it would explain Adam's calendar being out and the disappearance of a super civilization. Am I mad or just deluded? Well, I don't think you're either of that. I think you're just inquisitive, Mr. Bricks. Now, why did the Egyptians build earthquake-proof buildings, for instance? If you look at their buildings, they're very Inca-like. I think one of the things, along with the pole shift, to explain the super catastrophe, and to explain why mammoths are still frozen after the Ice Age, which science just refuses completely to discuss, as if the scientists are not even curious about this fact, which is bizarre. And you can actually read books by scientists who specialise in mammoths. Do they even ask the question of why the mammoths are still frozen when the Ice Age is over? No! And I think that's a disgrace to them. Personally, I do. And it shows they're not even curious about mammoths either. Or the Earth. I mean, what's going on? So, something which hit me like a eureka moment a while back is that the Earth might have suddenly imploded, shrinking in diameter by several %. This would create a bit of a jolt, which would then change the rotation from 360 to 365 days, as the angular momentum, the spin speed of the Earth would be retained, but over a smaller area. And I have put this into a blog. I'll put the link below. In addition, a smaller Earth explains the rise in sea levels, because the container is smaller, at the end of the so-called Ice Age. So that might actually have been the time of the pole shift and Earth implosion, instead with no Ice Age at all, just shifting poles, so the Arctic was moving around. Hence, the Atlantic had glaciation, but not Siberia. Why didn't Siberia have glaciation? The pole would have been in Greenland or UK or Canada, and Russia would have been closer to the equator with tropical vegetation, which is why the mammoths have lots of fern leaves and all this in their gut, but now they're still frozen because that whole Siberian area has become the Arctic, but it wasn't before. Okay, Uplink X64 says, Hey Charles, happy to hear you're doing another Q&A because I missed the last one. I want to ask this. Most people look a bit deeper into history, will come to the conclusion that there is a lot of false information going around in the official narrative. Why do you think this is? Is it a deliberate attempt to misinform the people at large, or is it merely a build-up from years and years of drawing the wrong conclusions and being unable to get back from that? Will we ever see another age of enlightenment, or are we being kept in the dark for a reason? What's your take on this? Love your videos, etc. Thank you so much. Well, I think people are scared to see another reality, even though they suspect another reality, because they've been reading books which have taken us on a different direction. And because of that, we're just never going to get back to the correct direction. I don't think it's ever going to happen officially. It'll just take amateurs to do it, and amateurs just have to come out with their own theories, however crazy they sound. They just have to keep bringing out their own theories, propounding them, expounding them, putting them into the public sphere, and that's the only way to get back into a sort of enlightened era of suddenly everyone has a thirst for knowledge. Because in the Enlightenment, it was just regular people driving the Enlightenment. It wasn't monks in the universities. They were too busy with Aristotle. They were always conservative. It was people like Diderot, people like Voltaire. It was people like Michael Faraday. Universities were obsolete in the Age of Enlightenment. That's how backward they were, and they're becoming backward again. So let's continue. Colchester Baby says, Q&A, what shampoo do you use, Charles? I don't use shampoo, I just use pure soap. Lowlands Pete says, what's your thought on solar death ray parabolic discs that were found on ancient sites? Key to heating, cutting, transforming rock and metals. A question that has a bit of both. Hope you're going to do hangouts in the near future. Invite me to join in, etc, etc. Greetings from Holland. Appreciate your work. I don't know what those are. I really don't know what those are. If you mean ancient lenses, then I don't know. What we've found is pretty primitive, and it doesn't magnify much. It only magnifies 1.5 times, or it actually reduces the size of the image. But it's known that, I think Nero used to look for a glass eye during the games to magnify what he was looking at. Who knows? Brent Ritchie says, my Q&A question, do you plan to do any videos on Antarctic pyramids? And the answer is not really. It's a possibility for the future though. And it does sound a bit like Lovecraft's Mountain of Madness, so I don't know, we'll see, alright? Fuzzy Dunlop 90 says, hi Charles, have you heard of the Kaimanawa Wall in New Zealand? If so, thoughts, natural or man-made? And I had a look at that, and I'm not sure, because it's only a small section of wall that seems to be in every photo. They always take the same photo, and it's only a small section of wall, so it could just be a huge piece of rock that's cracked. So I'd love to see if there was more wall. David Hill says, congrats Charles, your show is awesome, keep them coming, Q&A, yes! My question is, why hasn't anyone dispelled the myth of ancient military battles? I think it's logistically impossible to move 100,000 men from continent to continent without wiping out entire resources around their surroundings while on their marches. What say you? And I think you're absolutely right. The numbers of Persians could well have been exaggerated. They say there were hundreds of thousands of them. They were all kind of the same. They all just had a spear and a bow. Who knows? But if you are raising mass armies like that, obviously they are just civilians from a local area, just levies. And I think many of these mass armies are actually full of civilians who are waiting to conquer and occupy the infrastructure to maintain a Persian presence. So these huge armies of millions and millions, they could have just been like a migration. In fact, Alexander's march across Persia was a migration. He didn't want to be in Macedonia, he wanted to go to the ends of the earth, so he had to take his whole royalty with him. And he even had to tell his generals and his soldiers to mix with the Persians, to occupy them. So there you go. And look at the Battle of Britain. They used to say, oh, Britain was being swamped by the Germans. No, the fighter planes with the Germans were on a 1-to-1 ratio. In addition, the Germans were tired because they had to fly to England in the first place, and they could, whenever they lost a plane, they lost it over England. Whenever England lost a plane, they lost it over England. So who came out on top? The Spitfire was way superior to the German planes. So it's just another myth that a few stood against. Well, where did that come from? That's wartime propaganda, which has slipped into history. So it's the same. So back then, the people would have been saying on the street, oh, the Persians are here with 1 million men. And then the historians said, oh, 1 million men, I have to write that down. So that's how I think it happened. So Clash with John says, what are your thoughts on Hyperborea? I think Hyperborea is Hibernia, which is Ireland. J. Hugh says, what are your thoughts on ancient alien theories? And, you know, I've got lots of von Däniken books on that shelf behind the camera, and I reckon they're absolutely awesome. I love them. But if we want to adopt them, we need a bit more evidence, and lots of the evidence will come, I think, not from looking at cave art, but from actually looking into our DNA and seeing how the DNA works. For example, Why do we have so much affinity for dolphins, for dogs, for we're very similar to pigs, for whales, for mammals, but a chimpanzee is a rather shrill creature. A chimpanzee is, you wouldn't want to own a chimpanzee. It's a bit of a disaster unless they were very tame. And they're very different to us. They hate water. All the previous creatures I mentioned, horses as well. Horses are very good with humans. But chimps are not so good with humans. They kind of have to be trained. A chimp is not man's best friend. A dog is man's best friend. Dogs love to swim. Humans love to swim. Chimpanzees can't swim. There's something going on that's very different, and it's not being explained by the DNA theory. Ewan Sharp says, any comments or theories on the Kailash temple and or Rama Setu? Anyway, I looked up the Kailash temple. It's one of the most ridiculously complex structures I've ever seen, and if you started looking at that image from above, unbelievable. It looks almost like they've used concrete or something to build it. It's amazing. Even if you look at the cave walls around it, it's just even that looks like it's composed of different materials. So I don't know what's going on with that. That's weird. And the Rama Setu, again, it's an incredible mystery. Looks partly man-made. Finally, Will Wilson says, okay, idea for your next Q&A. Is there any theories you have come up with that, although they are most logical answers to you, they still make absolutely no sense and baffle you? No, unfortunately not, because everything I've come up with that I'm putting forward on this channel, it's ticking the boxes, and I'm trying to make everything make sense. And that's the reason I'm coming up with these theories, because the existing theories don't make any sense. Anyway, that seems to be the final... Oh no, that's the final question. That's the final question. Guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.